Settle into the sleepy mind channel, and tonight we will explore the quiet, hidden world of foxes, the creatures that move through forests, fields, and even human spaces with a level of precision that often goes completely unnoticed. In the early hours, when the landscape appears still, a fox moves almost without being seen, its paws meeting the ground so lightly that even dry leaves barely shift beneath it, while its ears turn towards sounds that never fully reach the surface, listening not just through the air, but into the ground itself. Then, without warning, the body gathers and lifts into a precise, silent arc, landing exactly where nothing visible had been moving at all, guided not by sight, but by a careful reading of sound, vibration, and space. As we follow the fox across changing terrain, a different way of moving through the world begins to take shape, one built on timing, sensitivity, and an awareness of details that are easy to miss until you slow down and notice them. What begins to take shape is not the story of an animal that forces its way through the world, by waiting and by choosing moments carefully, tracing quiet paths through landscapes that are constantly shifting beneath its feet. The fox enters the landscape without announcing itself. It does not push branches aside with force, the chest drawn in, the shoulders angled so that stems brush past without bending. Along the margins of hedgerows, where tangled growth forms low tunnels of thorn and leaf, the fox slips through narrow openings that appear from a distance like closed walls of vegetation. The shape of its body seems made for these passages, light and streamlined, allowing it to move through dense cover without snagging or slowing. Across open ground, each paw is placed with care. The foot comes down softly, pads spreading just enough to take in the surface texture before weight transfers fully through the limb. This careful placement reduces the sound of contact, allowing the fox to cross areas where even a small noise would carry across still air. When the wind drops and the land holds sound in place, the fox lowers its body closer to the ground, shortening the arc of each step so that its movement blends into the faint background noises of leaves shifting or insects stirring. The fox's frame is built for this kind of measured passage. Its narrow chest and light skeletal structure allow it to thread through dense growth without the resistance that a broader body would meet. Where thicker branches press inward, fur brushes lightly against bark and leaf. This lightness is not fragility. It is a form of efficiency that reduces the amount of force needed to move through cluttered environments. In places where the ground is uneven, scattered with fallen twigs, stones, and roots, the fox's body adapts with small adjustments of balance, weight shifting subtly from one side to the other to keep movement smooth and controlled. In human-altered landscapes, foxes map patterns of human movement and learn where space opens and closes. A narrow gap between fences becomes a regular route. A low opening beneath a hedge becomes a corridor that links gardens without requiring a crossing of open pavement. Some foxes learn specific safe pathways through neighborhoods, routes that allow them to move from one patch of cover to another while avoiding the most exposed areas. These pathways are not fixed lines on the ground. They are flexible routes, adjusted as gardens change, fences are repaired, and new obstacles appear. As these routes form, especially in cities, territories can overlap more than they would in sparsely resourced landscapes. The fox does not require exclusive control over every patch of ground. Instead, it moves through shared spaces at particular times, timing its movements to reduce direct encounters. This overlapping use of space allows foxes to exist at higher densities in urban environments, threading their movements between those of other foxes and people, fitting their activity into the quieter intervals that open and close across the night. The act of moving quietly through these varied spaces is not a single skill, but a continuous adjustment. The fox reads the ground through the feedback of its paws and the subtle shifts of balance in its limbs. On soft soil, the fox shortens its stride to keep each step controlled. On gravel, where loose stones can shift and click against one another, the fox alters its gait, distributing weight more evenly across each footfall to reduce sudden movement of the surface. On hard pavement, where sound travels easily, the fox may pause more often, listening before committing to each crossing, choosing moments when background noise offers brief cover for its own movement. These adjustments happen without visible effort. The fox's body seems to flow across the terrain. Fallen leaves form a shifting carpet that can either muffle sound or amplify it, depending on their dryness and depth. The fox tests this surface with the first touch of each paw, pressing lightly before transferring weight. In damp conditions, the leaves compress and settle quietly. In dry conditions, they crackle and shift, and the fox responds by slowing further, moving in shorter, more deliberate steps that limit disturbance. This way of moving through the landscape is not simply about avoiding detection. It shapes how the fox experiences the world. Each surface offers information about where the fox is and how the space around it is structured. The narrowness of a hedgerow tunnel tells the fox how much room there is to pass. The firmness of packed soil reveals where animals and people have moved before. The openness of a field edge signals exposure, and the fox's body responds by staying low and keeping to the line where grass meets hedge, where shadow and cover still offer partial concealment. Instead of forcing space open, a pace adjusts to avoid contact, and narrow gaps become preferred routes through cluttered ground. Movement slows where space tightens, then opens again as the terrain loosens, conserving energy and reducing risk while keeping disturbance to a minimum. As the fox continues along its routes, not as fixed lines, but as sequences of textures and obstacles that the body remembers, a particular low branch that must be ducked beneath, a loose stone that shifts if stepped on too heavily, a narrow gap that opens between two garden sheds. These features become part of an internal map, guiding movement even in low light or partial darkness. The fox's body recognizes these features through repeated experience, adjusting its posture and pace before conscious attention would be required. Its movement reflects accumulated familiarity with the textures and structures of its territory. Where a route has proven safe, the fox returns to it. Where a crossing has become exposed or blocked, the fox alters its path, seeking new lines of movement that offer similar cover. This constant updating of routes allows the fox to remain flexible in environments that change with seasons, weather, and human activity. The lightness of the fox's movement also influences how long it can remain active within a given space. By conserving energy and reducing noise, the fox may reduce its overall movement, resting more often to conserve energy. But the same principles of quiet, efficient travel apply when it does move. Each step is measured, each route chosen with an awareness of how much effort and exposure it will require. As the fox moves through overlapping territories in urban areas, the rise and fall of traffic, the intervals when the thin margins between buildings offer brief corridors of relative safety. These rhythms become part of the landscape itself, shaping the fox's movement just as much as hedgerows, fields, and woodland margins do. The fox's body fits itself into these rhythms, moving during the quieter hours when the risk of disturbance is lower. Across all these environments, the fox's movement remains guided by the same underlying principles. Its light frame allows it to pass through narrow spaces. Its careful foot placement reduces sound on varied surfaces. Its memory for safe pathways shapes the routes it takes through both natural and human-altered landscapes. Its willingness to share overlapping territories where resources are abundant allows it to exist in higher densities without constant conflict. These elements combine to create a style of movement that is less about speed or strength and more about fitting into the spaces the landscape offers. By tracing these quiet routes across fields, woodland, and streets, the fox becomes part of the fabric of each place it passes through. The ground carries faint impressions of its movement. The vegetation shifts and settles back into place, and the pathways it follows remain open, only for moments at a time, before blending again into the surrounding textures. The fox leaves little behind that can be seen, yet its presence is woven into the patterns of movement that shape how the landscape is used and shared. In the low light of early morning, a fox often pauses before it moves again. Its body settles into stillness, not frozen, but quietly balanced, weight spread lightly through its limbs. The ears turn forward, then angle slightly apart, each one shifting position in small, almost unnoticeable movements. To an observer, nothing appears to be happening. The field looks empty. The snow, if it is present, lies smooth and unbroken. Yet beneath the surface, the land is never fully silent. Small movements continue below ground, faint shifts of soil as animals tunnel or reposition themselves, minute sounds carried upward through layers of earth and snow. The fox listens into this hidden world. Its hearing is especially sensitive to low-frequency sounds, muffled noises produced when small mammals move through soil or under snow. These sounds do not travel cleanly through air. They are absorbed and reshaped by the ground, arriving at the surface as subtle vibrations rather than clear tones. The fox's ears are tuned to pick up these faint signals, separating them from the background hush of wind moving across grass or the distant rustle of leaves. The fox can become aware of prey that is entirely invisible, its presence betrayed only by the quiet disturbance of the ground above it. This listening is not passive. The fox does not simply wait for sound to come to it. It adjusts its posture. Sound travels differently than it does through soft soil. Snow can dampen certain frequencies while carrying others across its crust. The fox's ears tilt and rotate, seeking the angle at which these faint sounds become most distinct. Each small adjustment brings a clearer sense of where movement is occurring beneath the surface, allowing the fox to narrow its attention to a specific patch of ground. Once a sound has been isolated, not only in direction, but also in distance, low-frequency sounds travel outward in broad, spreading waves, and their point of origin is not always immediately clear. The fox listens to the slight differences in how the sound reaches each ear. One ear may receive the vibration a fraction of a moment before the other, or at a slightly different intensity. These differences are subtle, yet the fox's nervous system is adapted to register them, building a mental map of where the unseen movement lies beneath the surface. The act of localization becomes especially important when the fox prepares to commit its body into motion. When prey is hidden under snow or soil, the fox appears to use a combination of auditory information and internal alignment to improve its accuracy. Observations of fox hunting behavior suggest that the angle of the fox's leap correlates with the Earth's magnetic field. This alignment may provide a stable frame of reference, helping the fox to judge distance more reliably when visual cues are absent. The result is a hunting movement that appears precise even when the target cannot be seen. When the fox finally moves, steep arc, forelimbs tucked in slightly, muzzle angled toward the surface. The leap is not wide or sweeping. It is directed, aimed toward the point where sound and alignment suggest the prey is located. The fox lands with its weight concentrated over the spot it has identified, pressing its muzzle into the surface to reach whatever movement lies beneath. Sometimes the attempt is successful. Sometimes the prey has shifted position in the moments before impact. In either case, the fox learns from each attempt, refining its ability to judge distance and timing based on the outcomes of previous hunts. In near darkness, turning your head and listening from slightly different angles until its direction becomes clearer. A quiet hum or distant tapping grows more distinct as you shift position, building a sense of where it originates without seeing the source. The fox's listening into soil and snow follows the same logic, refined to vibrations far fainter than a human ear would usually notice. The ground itself plays an active role in shaping what the fox hears. Loose soil absorbs and scatters sound differently from compacted earth. Snow can act as an insulating layer, adapted for dawn and dusk hunting, are capable of detecting these subtle variations. The shape of the ear funnels sound toward the inner structures, while the ability to rotate each ear independently allows the fox to focus on particular patches of ground without moving its entire body. This reduces unnecessary motion, keeping the fox less visible and less audible to both prey and potential threats. As the fox moves through different environments, small mammals may move beneath leaf litter, creating faint rustles that travel differently through layers of decomposing leaves than through bare soil. In fields, prey may burrow just beneath the surface, their movements sending gentle vibrations through compacted ground. In snowy landscapes, the insulating layer of snow reshapes the soundscape entirely, requiring the fox to rely more heavily on low-frequency cues and internal alignment to judge where movement is occurring. The fox adapts its listening strategy to these changing conditions, adjusting how long it pauses, how it angles its ears, and how it positions its body before each attempt. This process of listening and localization extends beyond hunting. The fox also uses sound to read the broader landscape. The distant movement of other animals, or the subtle shifts in the environment caused by human activity, all register as part of the acoustic field the fox moves through. Even when the fox is not actively seeking prey, it remains attuned to these low-level sounds, using them to assess safety and opportunity. The ability to hear what is unseen allows the fox to move with a heightened awareness of what lies beyond the reach of its eyes. associating particular sound qualities with particular kinds of movement and potential reward. This learning process refines the fox's hunting strategy, allowing it to focus its efforts where success is more likely and to avoid wasting energy on movements that do not match familiar prey patterns. The fox's reliance on hearing also influences how it moves through the landscape between hunts. Low disturbance travel reduces the amount of noise the fox itself produces. The background noise of its own movement is reduced, sharpening its ability to detect subtle vibrations from the ground. This creates a feedback loop in which careful movement enhances hearing, and sensitive hearing reinforces the value of careful movement. The two work together to support a style of hunting that depends less on visual detection and more on an intimate awareness of the acoustic environment. In moments when the fox pauses and listens into the ground, small lives continue their movements, reshaping the soil in tiny ways, creating faint signals that ripple upward through layers of earth and snow. The fox reads these signals not as abstract information, but as actionable cues, guiding the placement of its body in space. Each leap is a response to an invisible event, each pause a moment of tuning into a world that exists just beyond the reach of sight. When a fox commits its body to a leap, weight settling through the hind limbs, the spine forming a shallow curve as muscles along the back prepare to release stored tension. The forelimbs draw in slightly, the muzzle aligns toward a point on the ground that, moments earlier, held no visible sign of movement. Then, in a brief and controlled arc, the fox lifts itself from the surface, rising just high enough to bring its body into alignment with the hidden target beneath. The leap itself is shaped by more than strength. It is guided by the fox's ability to judge distance to prey it cannot see, a stable reference that may help the fox to calibrate distance when visual markers are absent. This alignment provides a consistent frame within which the fox can translate faint sounds into spatial judgments, allowing the body to move toward a precise point beneath snow or soil, rather than landing in a broad, uncertain area. As the fox leaves the ground, reducing drag and keeping the center of mass aligned over the intended landing point, the hind limbs extend with controlled force, propelling the body upward without excess height. This economy of motion reduces the time the fox spends in the air, limiting the chance for the prey to shift position before impact. The leap is not an exaggerated display. It is a functional movement shaped by the need to convert sound-based information into physical action within a narrow window of time. When the fox lands and the muzzle follows, pressing into the surface where the prey is expected to be, snow compresses under the weight of the fox's body, sometimes forming a shallow crater. Loose soil shifts and collapses inward, briefly revealing the darker layers beneath. The fox's head and forepaws work together in these moments, clearing surface material quickly in an attempt to reach the hidden movement before it can retreat further underground. Even when the prey escapes, the fox's body registers the outcome of the attempt, adding to a growing internal record of how sound, alignment, and movement translate into success or failure. The mechanics of this pounce are repeated many times across a fox's life, while others pause or change direction more slowly. The fox's nervous system becomes attuned to these patterns, learning when to commit immediately and when to delay by a fraction of a second to allow the prey to move into a more accessible position. This fine-tuning of timing is as important as the physical strength of the leap itself. When a target shifts beneath an opaque surface, not where it was a moment earlier, a drifting stepping stone in shallow water is best reached by timing a jump to intersect its path, rather than reacting late to its last position. The fox translates sound and vibration into a prediction of location, committing its leap to an intercept point beneath snow or soil. The environment in which the pounce occurs shapes the physical demands of the movement. In deep snow, compressing snow and reaching the space beneath where prey may be moving, the resistance of snow changes with temperature and moisture. Fresh, powdery snow collapses easily, while compacted or crusted snow resists penetration, requiring greater force and more precise placement of weight. In loose soil, the fox's forepaws may sink slightly on impact, and the muzzle must clear earth quickly to prevent the prey from slipping away through newly disturbed tunnels. The fox adapts its force and angle of descent to these changing surface conditions, learning through repeated attempts how much energy is required to breach different materials. The fox's ability to align its leap with a stable external reference may help to reduce variability in these conditions. By orienting its body in relation to the Earth's magnetic field, this internal compass may help the fox to translate those cues into a specific angle of movement. The result is a leap that, while influenced by many variables, maintains a degree of consistency across different hunting contexts. This consistency reduces wasted energy and increases the likelihood that each pounce will land close enough to the prey to make capture possible. Allowing the fox to store and release energy efficiently, the spine flexes and extends in coordination with the limbs, transmitting force smoothly through the body. The forelimbs and shoulders become adept at absorbing impact, protecting joints while allowing rapid transition from landing to digging or grasping. These physical adaptations support a style of hunting that depends on sudden bursts of motion rather than prolonged pursuit. The leap is also influenced by the fox's need to remain quiet and inconspicuous. Excessive movement or repeated failed pounces could alert prey or draw the attention of competitors and larger predators. The fox therefore balances the need for decisive action with the need to minimize unnecessary disturbance. When a pounce fails, listening and reassessing before attempting another leap. This restraint conserves energy and maintains the element of surprise, reducing the likelihood that prey will adjust their behavior to avoid repeated attacks from the same location. As the fox moves through its territory, the fox may leap from a standing position, using the flat ground to generate a direct vertical arc. In woodland, fallen branches and uneven terrain may require the fox to adjust its takeoff point, stepping onto firmer ground before committing to the leap. In urban environments, the surfaces available for pouncing may include compacted soil at the margins of gardens or the thin strips of earth between pavement and wall. Each context presents different constraints on how the leap can be executed, and the fox adapts its body positioning accordingly. The precision of the fox's pounce is not only a matter of mechanics, but also of learning. Young foxes practice jumping and pouncing during play. The fox learns the limits of its reach and the relationship between the force it applies and the distance it can cover. This learning process continues throughout the fox's life as changing body condition, age, and environmental conditions alter the effectiveness of particular movements. The fox adjusts, finding new balances between effort and accuracy as circumstances shift. Each leap contributes to a pattern of interaction between the fox and the hidden layers of the landscape. Beneath snow, beneath soil, beneath leaf litter, the movements of small animals create brief windows of opportunity. The fox's pounce represents a moment when information gathered through sound and alignment is translated into physical contact with the surface. The ground bears the mark of this interaction in the form of shallow depressions, disturbed patches of snow, or small holes in soil that soon settle back into place. These traces fade quickly, leaving little visible record of the precise movements that took place. In the quiet intervals between pounces, a relationship shaped by repeated cycles of stillness, attention, and sudden, directed motion. Each pounce is an extension of the fox's ability to read the unseen, transforming faint signals from beneath the surface into a coordinated movement of muscle and bone that brings the hidden world momentarily into contact with the visible one. As daylight thins and the colors of the landscape begin to flatten into shades of gray, detail fades gradually, margins soften, and the contrast between moving and still elements becomes more important than fine visual texture. In these transitional hours, when dawn lifts slowly from the horizon or dusk settles across open ground, the fox moves within a visual field that favors motion over sharp detail. The shape of grass stems, the outlines of low shrubs, and the gentle rise and fall of uneven ground remain visible enough to guide movement, even as smaller features begin to blur into the background. The structure of the fox's eyes supports this way of seeing. Slit-like pupils can widen dramatically in low light, enhancing sensitivity in conditions where human eyes might already be struggling to separate shape from shadow. In brighter light, the pupils narrow, protecting the delicate structures within the eye and sharpening depth of field. This ability to adjust the size of the pupil allows the fox to function across a wide range of lighting conditions, from the soft glow of early morning to the deeper shadows of evening. Fox vision is particularly adapted for hunting at dawn and dusk. The fox's eyes prioritize the detection of motion over the resolution of fine detail. A slight shift in grass, the brief scurry of a small mammal across open ground, or the flutter of wings near the surface of a field becomes more noticeable than the precise outline of an object. The fox does not need to resolve every detail of its surroundings. It needs to notice when something moves against a largely still background. This emphasis on motion detection shapes how the fox navigates its environment. Rather than relying on crisp visual margins, allowing it to detect potential prey or the movement of other animals without needing full visual clarity. This mode of seeing aligns with the fox's broader strategy of quiet observation, in which attention is directed toward small shifts rather than dramatic visual cues. In low light, tactile cues become more important for navigating through dense cover and around obstacles. The whiskers brush against stems and branches, detecting airflow and changes in proximity. The fur along the legs senses contact with the ground and low vegetation, helping the fox maintain balance and avoid collisions when visual cues are reduced. These tactile inputs do not replace vision, but they complement it, filling in the gaps where light no longer provides clear guidance. In dim rooms, and touch becomes a quiet guide for navigating close spaces. A hand brushing lightly against a wall or doorway fills in what the eyes cannot resolve clearly. The fox experiences low light in much the same way, with vision offering broad context and tactile feedback, helping it move cleanly through tight cover. As the fox moves across open ground in low light, using the faint glow of remaining light to orient itself, the silhouette of hedgerows, the darker mass of woodland edges, and the open sweep of fields form a basic visual map that guides movement. Within this map, small movements stand out. A vole crossing an open patch of soil becomes visible as a brief flicker of motion. The fox's attention is drawn to these fleeting signals, prompting pauses and shifts in posture as it assesses whether the movement represents an opportunity. The limitations of fox vision are as important as its strengths. While motion detection is enhanced, particularly in very low light, the fox cannot rely on sight alone to identify prey with precision under these conditions. This limitation reinforces the fox's dependence on hearing and touch to locate targets that are partially hidden or moving beneath the surface. Vision provides context and orientation, while other senses provide the detailed information needed to act. The fox's sensory world is therefore a composite, with each sense contributing differently depending on lighting conditions and environmental context. The ability to widen pupils in low light also brings trade-offs. Increased sensitivity to light can make the eye more vulnerable to sudden brightness. When artificial light intrudes into the landscape, the fox may briefly experience glare or reduced visual clarity as its pupils adjust. This can influence how foxes move through human-altered environments, encouraging them to use darker corridors and to time crossings when artificial light is less intense. The fox learns these patterns through experience, integrating visual comfort into its broader map of safe routes. As dawn progresses and light increases, reducing the amount of light entering the eye and sharpening depth of field, fine detail becomes more visible, but the window of heightened motion sensitivity that accompanies low light begins to close. The fox's activity patterns reflect this shift. Many foxes reduce movement as daylight strengthens, retreating to cover where visual exposure to potential threats is reduced. The eyes that served well in dim conditions are less suited to prolonged activity in full daylight, and the fox adapts its behavior accordingly, resting during brighter hours and resuming movement when light levels once again favor its visual strengths. The interplay between light and vision shapes the fox's relationship with time. Dawn and dusk become periods of heightened opportunity, nor are they optimized for the brightest midday light. Instead, they are tuned to the transitional spaces between day and night, where motion stands out against a softened visual field. This tuning reflects a broader pattern of adaptation in which the fox positions its activity within the rhythms of light that structure the lives of many other small animals. As the fox moves through these shifting light conditions, textures appear muted, and movement becomes the primary signal of interest. In the deeper shadows of evening, contrasts sharpen briefly before dissolving into darkness. Throughout these transitions, the fox's eyes provide a continuous stream of information that guides movement and attention, even as the nature of that information changes. Vision does not operate in isolation, but as part of a sensory system that balances sight with sound and touch to maintain awareness in environments where light is never constant. In the fading light at the edge of night, its pupils widen to gather what little illumination remains. The outlines of the landscape soften, and the world becomes a field of subtle shifts rather than clear forms. The fox moves within this softened visual space, guided by motion, contrast, and the faint cues that remain visible as day yields to darkness. The eyes, tuned for these conditions, hold the fox within a narrow band of visibility that is neither full daylight nor complete night, allowing it to continue its quiet passage through the spaces between. When light fades and the shapes of the landscape soften into shadow, the air itself begins to change. As the fox moves forward, faint currents of air are redirected by stems, stones, and the edges of low branches. The whiskers along the muzzle, set wide and sensitive at their base, register these changes as subtle shifts in pressure. The fox does not need to touch every object directly. It senses the presence of nearby surfaces by how air flows around them, reading the shape of the space ahead through invisible patterns of movement. As the fox threads through narrow passages in dense cover, it gathers information about how close obstacles lie and how much room remains for the body to pass. In tight spaces, the whiskers bend before the face or shoulders would make contact, providing early warning that a gap is narrowing. This allows the fox to adjust its posture, angling its body or lowering its head to pass through without snagging fur or disturbing vegetation more than necessary. The whiskers act as a forward-reaching sense, extending the fox's awareness beyond the surface of its skin. Along the lower parts of the body, the fine hairs along the limbs register contact with grass stems, uneven soil, and low obstacles. These tactile cues help the fox sense the height of vegetation and the firmness of the ground beneath each foot. On uneven terrain, where roots and stones interrupt smooth movement, the fur along the legs detects changes in surface height before the full weight of the body is transferred. This allows the fox to maintain balance and adjust foot placement to avoid sudden slips or noisy contact with unstable surfaces. The ground itself communicates with the fox through pressure and texture. Each paw makes contact with the surface in a way that spreads force across soft pads, the looseness of gravel, or the compressibility of leaf litter. This tactile feedback travels up through the limbs, informing the fox how much weight can be applied without causing noise or instability. On damp earth, the surface yields slightly, and the fox can step with greater confidence that sound will be muffled. On dry leaves, the surface resists and crackles, prompting the fox to shorten its stride and distribute weight more carefully to reduce disturbance. These tactile signals work together with whisker input to create a detailed map of the fox's immediate surroundings, where vision offers a broader view of the landscape, reading air currents, surface textures, and ground firmness in real time. This is particularly important in low light, when visual detail is limited and the risk of collision with unseen obstacles increases. The fox's body remains oriented within the space through continuous sensory feedback, allowing it to move smoothly, even when sight alone would be insufficient. When vision is limited, noticing a doorway or narrowing passage before you collide with it. The fox does the same with whiskers and sensitive fur, reading the near space ahead through airflow and soft brush contact, then adjusting its path before contact becomes noisy or clumsy. As the fox moves across varied terrain, the whiskers part the stems ahead of the muzzle, giving the fox a sense of the density of the vegetation. dense growth produces greater resistance to airflow, which the whiskers register as a subtle increase in pressure. The fox may slow its pace in these conditions, lowering its body to pass beneath heavier stems. In more open ground, the whiskers encounter fewer disturbances, and the fox's movement becomes more fluid, its posture rising slightly as obstacles diminish. The tactile sensitivity of the legs also informs how the fox distributes its weight across each step. On ground that slopes or shifts, the fox adjusts its weight, reducing the risk of slipping or making noise. When stepping onto loose gravel, the fox may pause fractionally longer with each footfall, allowing small stones to settle before transferring weight. This subtle delay reduces the likelihood of sudden shifts that would create audible clicks or scrapes, preserving the quiet movement that is central to the fox's hunting strategy. These tactile adaptations contribute to the fox's ability to stalk prey without alerting it. By sensing airflow changes and surface texture before contact, heavy steps. This makes the fox's movement appear almost fluid, with each adjustment blending into the next. The result is a style of locomotion that is not only quiet, but also responsive to the smallest changes in the environment, allowing the fox to adapt to complex terrain without losing balance or rhythm. The tail also plays a role in maintaining balance during these movements, as the fox navigates uneven ground or makes quick directional changes, helping to stabilize the center of mass. While the tail is often associated with communication or warmth, its contribution to balance is evident when the fox makes rapid turns or adjusts posture in response to tactile cues from the ground. The combined effect of tail movement, leg sensitivity, and whisker input supports a finely tuned system of bodily awareness that allows the fox to move confidently through cluttered spaces, building an internal sense of how different textures behave underfoot. A patch of ground that becomes muddy after rain will feel different from the same patch when dry, and the fox adapts its movement accordingly. These learned associations allow the fox to anticipate how surfaces will respond to pressure, further reducing noise and instability. The body becomes attuned not only to immediate tactile feedback, but also to the memory of how certain textures tend to behave. In human-altered environments, metal grates and garden edging present textures that differ from natural ground. These surfaces transmit sound and vibration differently, and the fox learns to adjust its movement to minimize noise when crossing them. The whiskers detect the proximity of vertical surfaces like walls and fences, allowing the fox to follow narrow corridors without scraping fur or creating sound through contact. The fur along the legs senses changes in surface temperature and texture, helping the fox distinguish between soft soil, cold pavement, and the irregular surfaces of built structures. As the fox moves through these mixed environments, guided by the subtle feedback of air and surface, this awareness allows the fox to remain responsive to obstacles that appear suddenly, such as low branches or uneven ground, without breaking the smooth flow of movement. The fox's body remains in quiet conversation with the landscape, adjusting posture and pace in response to each new texture encountered. In moments of stillness, the tactile system continues to operate. Whiskers detect faint shifts in airflow as wind passes through nearby vegetation. Fur along the legs senses the pressure of grass stems or the coolness of damp soil against the body. These sensations contribute to the fox's perception of the immediate space, even when movement is minimal. The fox remains oriented within the environment through touch as well as through sound and sight, maintaining a layered awareness that does not depend on any single sense alone. Through the combined sensitivity of whiskers and ground feel, the fox maintains a close, continuous connection to the textures of the landscape. Each step, each pause, is informed by subtle feedback that shapes how the body moves through space. This tactile awareness supports the fox's broader strategy of quiet, adaptable movement, allowing it to navigate complex environments with minimal disturbance and sustained balance as it continues along the narrow, shifting paths that connect one patch of cover to the next. As the fox moves through its territory, fallen fruit lies scattered among leaves. The fox's diet is not defined by a single prey type or feeding strategy. It is shaped by opportunity, season, and the changing availability of resources within the spaces the fox passes through. This flexibility allows the fox to persist in environments that would not support a more specialized feeder. Foxes are opportunistic omnivores. Their meals may include small mammals, insects, birds, fruit, and carrion, drawn from whatever the surrounding environment offers at a given moment. In open farmland, rodents form a frequent part of the diet, their movements beneath soil and grass providing regular hunting opportunities. In woodland, beetles and other invertebrates become accessible in leaf litter and decaying wood. In late summer and autumn, fallen fruit offers a readily available source of energy, scattered across the ground in orchards, hedgerows, and gardens. The fox moves between these food sources as they appear and fade, adjusting its attention to what the land provides. In urban environments, discarded human food can enter this pattern of foraging. The edges of streets, the margins of bins, and the quiet corners of gardens sometimes offer scraps that a fox can consume. These resources are unpredictable and often inconsistent, but they can supplement natural prey when other sources are scarce. The fox does not depend on these foods exclusively. Instead, they become part of a broader diet that reflects the varied landscape the fox occupies. This flexibility in feeding behavior supports survival in unpredictable environments, where the availability of any single food source may fluctuate from night to night. The fox's digestive system is adapted to seasonal changes in diet. When prey abundance shifts, the internal processes that extract nutrients from food adjust accordingly. In periods when small mammals are plentiful, the fox's diet may be richer in protein and fat. When insects and fruit become more prominent, the digestive system accommodates these different compositions, processing softer plant matter alongside animal tissue. This internal flexibility allows the fox to extract usable energy from a wide range of foods without being constrained to a narrow nutritional niche. The fox's body reflects the same adaptability seen in its movement through the landscape. As food availability changes, the fox regulates its activity in response. When prey is abundant, the fox may spend more time moving through its territory, hunting and foraging with regularity. When food becomes scarce, the fox conserves energy by reducing movement, resting more often, and traveling shorter distances between feeding attempts. This behavioral adjustment limits unnecessary energy expenditure during lean periods, increasing the likelihood that the fox can survive until resources become more plentiful again. In areas where rodents are abundant, The fox refines its listening and pouncing techniques to target movements beneath soil and snow. In places where insects form a larger part of the available food, the fox may spend more time foraging at ground level, nosing through leaf litter and low vegetation. When birds become accessible, particularly during nesting seasons, the fox may alter its approach, moving more cautiously through areas where sudden movement could startle prey into flight. These strategic adjustments reflect learning from previous encounters, as the fox adapts its behavior based on what has proven successful or unsuccessful in a given context. Repeated interactions with different food sources shape the fox's expectations. The fox learns where certain foods tend to appear and when they are most likely to be available. A particular field edge may yield rodents consistently. A compost heap may attract insects during warm months. Fallen fruit may be scattered beneath trees at particular times of year. These patterns become part of the fox's internal map of its territory, guiding its movements as it passes through different patches of habitat. The fox does not move randomly in search of food. Its foraging is informed by memory of where resources have been found before and by ongoing assessment of current conditions. The digestive flexibility of the fox supports this pattern of varied feeding. The internal processes that break down different types of food allow the fox to switch between prey types without prolonged periods of inefficiency. When the composition of the diet shifts, the fox's body adjusts to extract nutrients from the available mix. This physiological adaptability complements behavioral flexibility, allowing the fox to make use of whatever resources the landscape presents. Together, these adaptations reduce the risk of starvation in environments where food availability can change rapidly. As the fox moves through its territory, feeding opportunities appear and disappear with changes in season, weather, and human activity. A field that offers abundant rodents one month may be plowed the next, altering the availability of prey. Insects flourish during warm periods and decline as temperatures fall. Human food waste may appear unpredictably, influenced by patterns of disposal and activity. The fox responds to these fluctuations by adjusting both its diet and its movement, focusing effort where the likelihood of finding food is highest and conserving energy when opportunities diminish. This constant adjustment creates a feeding strategy that is dynamic rather than fixed. The fox's omnivorous diet allows it to bridge gaps between periods of abundance and scarcity, drawing on different resources as they become available. The fox does not need to specialize narrowly to survive. Instead, it thrives through flexibility, assembling its meals from the shifting offerings of the landscape and adjusting its activity to match the rhythms of resource availability. As the night progresses, the fox may move from one feeding opportunity to another, sampling the landscape in small increments rather than relying on a single, large meal. Each successful capture or foraging moment contributes to the fox's energy balance, supporting continued movement and vigilance. The feeding process is woven into the fox's broader pattern of quiet travel through its territory, with each meal representing a brief pause in the ongoing dialogue between the fox and the changing environment it inhabits. When food appears in brief abundance, the fox does not always consume everything it finds in a single moment. Instead, excess food is often carried away from the point of capture and hidden in small, scattered caches known as larders. These hidden stores may be tucked beneath loose soil, pressed into shallow depressions among leaves, or covered lightly with debris to mask scent and visibility. The act of caching transforms a fleeting opportunity into a resource that can be returned to later, extending the usefulness of a successful hunt beyond the immediate moment. The fox remembers the locations of multiple hidden food sites. These are not stored as simple coordinates, but as places embedded within the texture of the landscape. A particular cache may lie beside the base of a crooked fence post, near the edge of a stone partly sunk into the ground, or beneath a small cluster of distinctive plants. The fox does not rely on scent alone to relocate these stores. Instead, it uses landmarks and spatial memory to return to precise spots, even after days or weeks have passed and surface scents have faded or been disturbed by rain and wind. This memory can persist for weeks, allowing the fox to draw on past abundance during periods of scarcity. When prey becomes harder to find, the fox may revisit a sequence of known cache sites, checking each location in turn. Some caches will have been disturbed by other animals or rendered unusable by environmental changes, but others remain intact, providing reliable access to stored food. The fox's movement through its territory during these periods reflects this pattern, tracing a loose circuit between remembered hiding places rather than ranging widely in search of new prey. Caching is not a passive strategy. The fox is aware that hidden food can be discovered by others. Other foxes, as well as scavenging animals, may uncover caches if they come across the same landmarks or detect residual scent. To reduce the risk of theft, the fox may move caches, relocating stored food from one hiding place to another. This behavior reflects an understanding that caches are vulnerable over time, and that relocating them can prolong their usefulness. The fox balances the effort required to move food against the likelihood that it will remain available if left in place. There is also the possibility of theft in the other direction. When a fox encounters a cache hidden by another individual, it may take advantage of the discovery and consume or relocate the food for its own use. This creates a dynamic in which caches are both personal stores and potential shared resources within overlapping territories. The presence of multiple foxes in an area increases the likelihood that caches will be discovered, prompting individuals to vary hiding strategies and to distribute caches across different parts of their territory rather than concentrating them in a single area. The fox's ability to use landmarks to relocate caches reflects a broader capacity for spatial memory. The fox builds an internal representation of its territory that includes not only paths and feeding sites, but also the locations of stored resources. These representations are updated as the landscape changes. If a landmark is altered or removed, the fox may have difficulty locating a cache, prompting the need to rely on alternative cues or to abandon that store altogether. This sensitivity to environmental change encourages the fox to choose landmarks that are relatively stable, such as large stones, mature tree trunks, or fixed human-made structures when hiding food. Locations of stored items are often remembered in relation to nearby features rather than as precise measurements. Something is recalled as being beside a particular gate, under a bench, or near a distinctive object that anchors the memory. The fox returns to hidden food in the same way, using landmarks within the landscape to guide retrieval rather than relying on scent alone. The distribution of caches across the territory also influences how the fox moves through space. Instead of returning repeatedly to a single central store, the fox maintains multiple smaller caches spread across different areas. This reduces the risk that the loss of any one cache will have a significant impact on overall food availability. It also allows the fox to draw on stored resources without traveling long distances, conserving energy during periods when movement may be costly. The pattern of movement that emerges is one of small, repeated circuits between familiar landmarks, rather than long, exploratory forays. Caching behavior interacts with the fox's regulation of activity based on food availability. When prey is plentiful, the fox may invest time and energy in creating and maintaining caches, accepting the short-term cost of carrying food and hiding it in exchange for longer-term security. When food becomes scarce, the fox draws on these stored resources, reducing the need for extended hunting excursions. This strategy smooths out fluctuations in food availability, allowing the fox to maintain a more stable energy balance across changing conditions. Environmental factors influence how effective caching can be. In wet conditions, buried food may spoil more quickly or be more easily detected by other animals through scent carried by moisture. In dry conditions, scent may persist longer on the surface, increasing the risk of discovery. The fox responds to these conditions by adjusting how deeply food is buried and how thoroughly it is covered. Shallow caches allow for quick retrieval, but may be more vulnerable to detection. Deeper caches are more secure, but require more effort to create and retrieve. The fox balances these factors based on immediate circumstances and the perceived risk of theft. The act of moving caches introduces an additional layer of complexity to the fox's relationship with stored food. By relocating a cache, the fox not only reduces the likelihood of theft, but also updates its internal map of resource locations. Each move requires the fox to remember both the original and the new location, integrating this information into its broader spatial representation of the territory. This creates a network of remembered points across the landscape, each associated with a particular hiding event and a particular resource. Caching and remembering are therefore not isolated behaviors, but part of a continuous interaction between the fox and the landscape it inhabits. The fox reads the stability of landmarks, the likelihood of discovery, and the effort required to retrieve stored food, adjusting its strategies accordingly. In areas where the landscape is relatively stable, caches may remain usable for longer periods. In more dynamic environments, such as those shaped by human activity or seasonal changes, caches may be more frequently relocated or abandoned. As the fox moves through its territory, the presence of caches influences its choices of route and timing. A fox may pass through an area not because it expects to find new prey there, but because it remembers a hidden store nearby. This memory-guided movement adds another layer to the fox's use of space, overlaying feeding routes with a network of stored resources. The fox's path through the landscape is therefore shaped not only by immediate opportunities, but also by past successes preserved in hidden form beneath soil and leaf litter. In the quiet moments when the fox uncovers a cache and consumes what remains, the action represents the return of stored energy into the present. A hunt from days or weeks earlier extends its influence into the current moment, supporting continued movement and awareness. The fox's ability to bridge time in this way, carrying resources forward through memory and concealment, reflects a form of planning that operates without foresight in the human sense, yet achieves a similar outcome of buffering against uncertainty. Through caching and remembering, the fox transforms parts of the landscape into a distributed pantry, with each hiding place representing a small reserve of energy embedded within familiar ground. The landscape becomes layered not only with paths and hunting sites, but also with remembered stores, each one tied to specific landmarks and moments of past abundance. This network of hidden resources supports the fox as it continues to move through changing conditions, drawing on what the land has offered before to sustain what it can do next. As the fox moves through its territory, the presence of other foxes is rarely announced by direct encounter. More often, it is sensed through subtle changes in the landscape. Paths appear slightly more worn. A scent mark lingers on a stone or tuft of grass. The ground near a favored hunting spot carries faint traces of repeated visits. These signs point to a pattern of shared use rather than exclusive ownership. The fox is typically a solitary hunter, moving alone as it searches for prey, relying on its own senses and timing rather than on coordinated group action. This solitary approach shapes how it moves, listens, and chooses moments to engage with the landscape. Unlike wolves, which rely on pack coordination to pursue and bring down larger prey, foxes hunt independently. Their bodies and strategies are adapted for small, quiet movements and sudden, precise actions rather than for sustained chases that require cooperation. This independence allows foxes to spread out across a landscape, reducing direct competition for the same prey at the same moment. Each fox follows its own routes and rhythms, selecting hunting grounds based on personal experience and immediate conditions rather than group strategy. Even so, foxes are not isolated from one another in their use of space. Family groups may share territory, particularly during periods when young are being raised. In these contexts, parents may hunt within overlapping areas, and their movements through the landscape may intersect more frequently. This shared use of ground does not necessarily involve coordinated hunting in the manner of pack animals, but it does create zones where multiple foxes draw from the same pool of resources. The presence of family members within a shared area can influence where and when each individual chooses to forage, reducing the likelihood of conflict through temporal separation rather than spatial exclusion. In environments where food sources are abundant, particularly in urban areas, fox territories can overlap more than they do in landscapes with fewer resources. The presence of readily available food reduces the pressure to defend exclusive hunting grounds. Instead of maintaining strict territorial boundaries, foxes tolerate a degree of overlap, adjusting their movements to avoid direct encounters. This overlapping use of space allows a higher density of foxes to coexist within a relatively small area, each one fitting its activity into the quieter intervals left by others. The shared ground of overlapping territories becomes a landscape of negotiated use. A fox may pass through an area at a particular time because it has learned that another fox typically uses that same space earlier in the night. These temporal patterns reduce the likelihood of direct confrontation. The fox reads not only the physical landscape, but also the rhythms of other foxes' movements, adjusting its own routes and timing to fit into the gaps. This form of spatial and temporal partitioning allows multiple individuals to draw from the same resources without constant conflict. Shared spaces often settle into informal patterns of use over time. Some pass through early, others later, and preferred routes emerge that reduce constant overlap. Foxes share ground in a similar way, fitting their activity into the rhythms of others, rather than competing directly for the same space at the same moment. The solitary hunting style of the fox influences how it perceives the presence of others. Without pack members to rely on, the fox remains attuned to signs of other foxes in the area, using scent and subtle environmental cues to assess recent activity. The fox does not need to confront every sign of another individual. Instead, it uses these cues to decide when to move through an area and when to seek alternative routes. This awareness supports a style of coexistence that minimizes direct competition while still allowing shared use of productive hunting grounds. When family groups are present, the dynamics of shared ground can shift. Parents raising young may tolerate closer proximity to one another, with overlapping use of space reflecting the shared goal of provisioning kits. In these contexts, hunting may occur in the same general area, though still largely independently. The presence of multiple adults within a shared territory increases the likelihood that prey will be encountered and consumed quickly, reducing the need for prolonged search. Even here, however, the fox's fundamental approach remains solitary. Each individual locates and captures prey on its own, without coordinated pursuit. The fox's independence in hunting does not preclude occasional cooperation in other contexts. When raising young, parents may take turns provisioning the den, their movements overlapping in time and space to ensure that food is delivered regularly. This cooperation is limited in scope and duration, tied to the specific demands of reproduction, rather than representing a permanent social structure. Outside of these periods, the fox returns to its characteristic pattern of solitary foraging within a shared landscape. The structure of shared ground also influences how foxes respond to changes in resource availability. In times of abundance, overlapping territories can expand, with foxes tolerating closer proximity and drawing from the same areas with minimal conflict. In times of scarcity, the same overlapping use of space may become more tightly regulated, with foxes reducing overlap and increasing the separation of their activity in time or space to avoid competition. These adjustments reflect a flexible approach to territoriality, in which boundaries are not fixed lines, but shifting patterns of use shaped by resource distribution. Urban environments provide a particularly clear example of this flexibility. In cities, food sources can be concentrated in specific areas, such as along streets with frequent waste, or in gardens where small animals congregate. Multiple foxes may use these same areas, but their activity patterns are staggered to reduce direct encounters. One fox may pass through shortly after dusk, another later in the night, and another closer to dawn. The ground itself becomes a shared resource, with each fox fitting its movement into the temporal structure created by the presence of others. This shared use of ground does not eliminate competition entirely. Foxes may occasionally encounter one another, and these encounters can involve displays or avoidance behaviors that reinforce individual boundaries. However, the overall pattern is one of coexistence rather than constant conflict. By maintaining solitary hunting strategies and adjusting spatial and temporal use of shared ground, foxes are able to occupy overlapping territories without the need for rigid, aggressively defended boundaries. As the fox moves through these shared spaces, it remains aware of the traces left by others. The presence of scent marks, the subtle changes in the ground, and the patterns of disturbance around feeding sites all contribute to an understanding of how the space is being used. This awareness allows the fox to make informed decisions about where to hunt and when to move, reducing the likelihood of costly encounters and increasing the efficiency of its solitary foraging. The landscape, in this way, becomes a layered map of individual paths and shared routes. Each fox contributes to the shaping of these patterns through repeated movement, leaving behind faint traces that guide the movements of others. The ground is shared not through explicit agreement, but through the quiet adjustment of behavior in response to the presence of others. Solitary hunters move within a shared ground, each one navigating a personal path through a space that belongs to none of them alone. The ground offers more than pathways for the fox. In certain places, it opens into spaces of shelter, where soil, roots, and stones form chambers that hold warmth and quiet. A fox den is not always a freshly dug structure. Often it is a place that has been used before, returned to across seasons and even across generations. Old burrows made by other animals may be widened and adjusted, their entrances reshaped to suit the fox's narrower body and the particular contours of the surrounding ground. The den becomes part of the landscape's memory, a cavity within the earth that continues to be useful long after its original maker has moved on. These dens are rarely simple holes. Many have multiple entrances, each one opening to the surface in a slightly different direction. One opening may face into the shelter of a hedge, while another emerges onto a more open slope. This arrangement allows the fox to leave the den by different routes, depending on what the surface environment offers at a given moment. If one entrance is disturbed or exposed, another may remain quiet and concealed. The pattern of openings creates a small network beneath the surface, offering flexibility in how the den is used and how the fox moves between interior and exterior spaces. The placement of dens reflects attention to the behavior of water and temperature within the ground. A den positioned on a slight slope drains more effectively than one in a low-lying hollow, reducing the likelihood that rainwater will pool inside. The surrounding soil acts as insulation, buffering the interior from rapid changes in surface temperature. In colder conditions, the ground retains heat gathered during the day, slowing the loss of warmth overnight. In warmer conditions, the same mass of soil absorbs heat from the interior, keeping the den cooler than the air above. This moderation of temperature creates a more stable environment for rest and for raising young. Inside the den, the texture of the space is shaped by repeated use. Soil becomes compacted where bodies pass frequently. The floor settles into a smoother surface where foxes lie and turn. The walls may show faint traces of fur and the marks of paws as the fox adjusts its position within the confined space. These subtle changes alter the internal shape of the den, creating a space that reflects the movements of the bodies that have occupied it. The den becomes fitted to the fox's form, a negative space shaped by repeated contact. Young foxes spend much of their early development near the den entrance. In the brighter patches of ground just outside the openings, kits play, their movements clumsy at first, then gradually more coordinated. They tumble against one another, chase small moving objects, and practice short bursts of running that mimic later hunting movements. This play strengthens motor skills and builds familiarity with the textures of the ground around the den. The entrance area becomes a transitional space between the protected interior and the wider world beyond, where kits learn to balance, to adjust to uneven surfaces, and to move with growing control. The den itself may be used repeatedly across generations. A site that has proven dry, stable, and well positioned within a territory can remain useful long after the original occupants have left. Subsequent foxes may return to the same cavity, clearing debris and adjusting entrances to suit their own needs. This continuity links the present use of the den with past patterns of occupation, embedding the den within the longer history of the landscape. The ground, in this sense, holds a record of repeated sheltering, with certain places becoming reliable points of refuge within shifting territories. The choice to modify abandoned burrows, rather than excavate entirely new ones, reflects an efficient use of energy. Digging through compacted soil requires sustained effort, and the fox benefits from the labor already invested by other animals. By reshaping existing cavities, the fox adapts the space to its own body while conserving energy that can be directed toward hunting and movement. This practice also allows dens to appear in locations that might otherwise be difficult to excavate, such as beneath dense root systems or in firm, well-drained soils where digging from scratch would be more demanding. The arrangement of multiple entrances also influences how the den functions as a refuge. In moments of disturbance, the fox can retreat into the den and leave by an alternate opening if necessary. This reduces the risk associated with using a single, easily blocked exit. The interior pathways connecting entrances create a short, concealed route beneath the surface, allowing the fox to reappear in a different location with minimal exposure. The den thus acts not only as a resting place, but also as a point of transition, enabling flexible movement between the hidden and visible layers of the landscape. The den's location within the territory reflects the fox's broader patterns of movement. Dens are often positioned within areas that balance concealment with access to hunting grounds. The surrounding cover provides protection from view, while nearby open spaces allow for movement and foraging. The den is rarely placed in the most exposed part of the territory, nor in the deepest, most inaccessible cover. Instead, it sits at a threshold between these zones, allowing the fox to emerge into a landscape that offers both shelter and opportunity. The den functions like a carefully chosen resting place within a larger journey. A traveler may select a campsite that is sheltered from wind and rain, positioned slightly above the surrounding ground to avoid pooling water, and close enough to paths and resources to allow easy departure. The fox's den reflects similar considerations, shaped not by deliberate planning in a human sense, but by repeated selection of sites that offer comfort, safety, and practical access to the surrounding terrain. These selections produce dens that align closely with the physical needs of the fox's body and the rhythms of its movement. The internal environment of the den also influences how the fox rests. The moderated temperature and reduced airflow create conditions that support longer periods of rest without the rapid loss or gain of body heat experienced on the surface. The confined space reduces exposure to wind and precipitation, and the surrounding soil dampens external noise. Within this insulated pocket, the fox can rest more deeply, conserving energy between periods of activity. The den becomes a place where the sensory demands of the surface world are softened, allowing the body to recover from the constant adjustments required by movement through open terrain. As seasons change, the role of the den shifts. During colder periods, the insulating properties of the ground become more valuable, offering protection from freezing temperatures. During warmer periods, the cooler interior of the den provides relief from surface heat. The fox adapts its use of the den accordingly, spending more time within it when conditions outside become energetically costly. This seasonal rhythm ties the den to the broader cycle of environmental change, with the underground space serving as a buffer against extremes. The presence of kits adds another layer to the den's function. The interior becomes a nursery, a space where the young are sheltered from weather and many surface threats. The multiple entrances allow adults to approach and leave without always using the same route, reducing the likelihood that predators or competitors will associate repeated surface movement with the den's location. The den thus supports not only the physical needs of the adult fox, but also the developmental needs of the next generation, providing a stable base from which learning and growth can unfold. As the fox moves away from the den and back into the open landscape, the underground space remains as a quiet point of return. The entrances blend into surrounding vegetation and soil, becoming difficult to distinguish from the many small openings that dot the ground. Yet for the fox, these openings mark a familiar threshold, a place where the textures of surface and subsurface meet. The den anchors the fox within its territory, offering a fixed point amid shifting routes and changing conditions, a sheltered cavity within the ground that continues to hold warmth, quiet, and the faint traces of repeated use. In the shallow light just beyond the den entrance, the ground becomes a place of first exploration for young foxes. The interior of the den holds stillness and warmth, but the space at its mouth opens into a shifting surface of soil, leaf litter, and grass stems that move with wind and passing bodies. Kits gather here, drawn by light and the faint sounds of the surface world. Their bodies are smaller and less coordinated than those of adults, and their early movements carry a quality of uncertainty as they test the ground with tentative steps and sudden, uneven bursts of motion. As these small movements begin to settle into steadier patterns, the ground beyond the den starts to invite longer attention, and the next steps extend outward from play into practice. Play unfolds within this narrow band of space between shelter and exposure. Kits chase one another in short arcs, tumble over uneven ground, and pause often to reorient themselves when a movement sends them off balance. These playful interactions are not aimless. Through repeated play, coordination improves. Limbs learn how to move together, how to push against the ground without overcommitting weight, and how to recover balance after a misstep. The muscles that will later support hunting and travel across varied terrain are strengthened through these small, repeated efforts, building control gradually rather than through deliberate training. The textures of the ground around the den entrance shape how kits learn to move. Loose soil shifts beneath small paws, requiring constant adjustment of stance. Dry leaves slide and compress, creating unpredictable footing. Grass stems brush against legs and bellies, offering tactile feedback that helps kits orient their bodies within space. Each stumble and recovery refines the relationship between sensory input and movement. The body begins to learn what kinds of pressure the ground can bear, how surfaces change with moisture, and how to distribute weight to avoid slipping. These lessons are absorbed through experience, embedded within the developing nervous system as patterns of movement that will later support more complex behaviors. Play also strengthens social bonds among kits. As they push and tumble together, they learn the limits of contact, the difference between playful engagement and movements that provoke distress. Subtle cues emerge through repeated interaction, shaping how individuals respond to one another's postures and motions. These early social exchanges build a foundation for later interactions within family groups, where proximity and coordination may be required during feeding or movement around shared spaces. The den mouth becomes a small social arena, a place where bodies learn to negotiate space with one another as well as with the ground. The presence of adults nearby shapes the tone of these early explorations. While kits play, adult foxes may remain just inside the den or move in and out of the entrance area, their larger bodies creating shifting patterns of shadow and movement. Kits watch these movements closely. Observation becomes a form of learning. The way an adult steps over an obstacle, adjusts posture when turning, or pauses to listen into the surrounding environment offers a model for how to move within the broader landscape. These observed movements gradually inform the kit's own actions, even before they venture far from the den. These early movements resemble the way young children learn to navigate uneven ground. At first, steps are tentative, balance uncertain, and falls frequent. The body begins to anticipate changes in surface and to adjust posture automatically. The ground that once felt unpredictable becomes familiar, and movement grows more fluid. The kit's play at the den mouth follows this pattern, with repeated low-stakes encounters with uneven surfaces, building confidence and coordination without the immediate risks associated with more distant exploration. As weeks pass, the range of movement around the den entrance expands. Kits venture slightly farther from the opening, exploring small patches of surrounding ground, before retreating back into the shelter of the den. These short excursions allow them to encounter new textures and sounds, while still remaining within a familiar frame of reference. The boundary between den and landscape becomes less rigid, with the entrance serving as a point of return rather than a strict dividing line. This gradual expansion of range supports the development of spatial awareness, teaching kits how to orient themselves in relation to a fixed reference point. The rhythms of activity around the den mouth shift with time of day and with the presence of adults. In quieter moments, kits may gather near the entrance, lying close together on the ground where warmth from the den interior meets the cooler air outside. In more active periods, play becomes more vigorous, with short chases and sudden changes in direction that mirror, in simplified form, the movements required during later hunting and travel. These bursts of activity are interspersed with rest, allowing muscles to recover and the nervous system to integrate new patterns of coordination. The den mouth also becomes a place where sensory awareness develops. Kits begin to notice the sounds of the surrounding environment, the distant movements of other animals, the rustle of leaves, and the subtle changes in airflow that accompany shifts in weather. While their responses to these cues are initially inconsistent, repeated exposure builds familiarity. Over time, the kits learn which sounds signal potential disturbance and which are part of the background of the landscape. This growing sensitivity lays the groundwork for later vigilance when kits begin to move more independently through their territory. As kits grow, their bodies change in proportion and strength. Limbs lengthen, muscles develop, and movements become more controlled. The playful tumbles of early weeks gradually give way to more deliberate forms of movement. Short chases become smoother. Sudden turns become more stable. The ground at the den mouth, once a challenging terrain, becomes a familiar training surface where coordination is refined. The entrance area thus functions as a natural training ground, a place where the skills required for survival are developed through repeated, low-risk interaction with the environment. The relationship between kits and the den mouth reflects a broader pattern of learning through gradual exposure. Rather than being thrust into the full complexity of the landscape at once, kits encounter the world in expanding circles, each one building on the familiarity of the previous. The den provides a constant point of reference, anchoring exploration within a space that offers safety and return. This structure supports learning by allowing mistakes to occur within a controlled range, where the consequences are limited and recovery is possible. As the kit's movements grow more confident, the space at the den mouth becomes less of a boundary and more of a passage. The young foxes begin to move beyond it with greater frequency, stepping into the wider landscape with skills honed through weeks of play and observation. The den remains behind them as a place of return, but the ground beyond the entrance now holds greater interest and possibility. The early lessons learned in this narrow band of space between interior and exterior continue to shape how the kits move, balance, and respond as they begin to follow the routes that will carry them further into the world beyond the den. As young foxes move beyond the den entrance and begin to explore the surrounding territory, the act of hunting emerges gradually from play and observation. The movements that once unfolded as tumbling games near the den begin to take on clearer direction. Short chases become more purposeful. Pauses grow longer as attention fixes on small movements in grass or leaf litter. The landscape becomes not only a space for movement, but a field of potential encounters, where each sound and shift in texture might signal the presence of prey. Learning to hunt is shaped by experience rather than by sudden instruction. Young foxes watch the movements of adults, noticing how bodies lower when approaching cover, how steps slow as attention narrows, and how sudden bursts of motion are timed to moments of opportunity. These observations are absorbed through repeated exposure. The kits do not mimic every movement perfectly at first. Their early attempts are often poorly timed or misdirected, with pounces that land short or overshoot the target. Each failed attempt, however, provides information that refines future movement, gradually aligning intention with outcome. The landscape around the den offers a varied training ground. Small insects moving across the surface provide early targets for practice, requiring quick reactions but posing little challenge to capture. Later, movements beneath soil or leaf litter draw attention, prompting kits to pause and listen, then attempt short, awkward pounces. These early efforts are inefficient. but they establish the basic coordination between sensory input and physical response. Over time, repeated attempts strengthen the link between hearing, sight, and movement, allowing the young fox to begin predicting where unseen movement will emerge. There is a moment in learning when hesitation gives way to commitment. Early in development, kits may pause too long, allowing prey to move out of reach. Gradually, they learn to balance caution with decisiveness, committing to movement at the right moment rather than waiting for certainty that never arrives. This balance is not taught explicitly. It emerges through repeated trials in which delayed action leads to missed opportunities, while premature action leads to wasted energy. The body begins to settle into a rhythm of attention, preparation, and release that reflects the timing required for successful hunting. This process resembles how skills develop through practice in many contexts. A new movement, such as catching a ball or striking a target, begins with awkward timing and uncertain coordination. Through repetition, the body learns to anticipate motion, adjust in posture, and force to meet a moving target. The fox's learning follows this same arc. Each failed hunt contributes to a growing internal sense of timing and distance, refining the connection between what is perceived and how the body responds. As young foxes gain experience, their hunting strategies begin to change. They learn that certain approaches work better for certain types of prey. Movements beneath soil require patience and listening, while insects on the surface may be captured through quick, direct motion. The fox begins to differentiate between situations that call for slow stalking and those that allow for immediate pursuit. This differentiation reflects learning from failed hunts, with strategies adjusted based on outcomes rather than on abstract rules. The fox's hunting style becomes shaped by the particular prey species and environmental conditions it encounters most frequently. The role of adults remains important throughout this learning phase. Adults often bring food back to the den, providing young foxes with direct experience of prey items and the opportunity to observe handling and consumption. The presence of adults near hunting sites also exposes kits to the rhythms of foraging, showing them when to pause, when to move, and how to retreat when a situation changes. These experiences provide a framework within which young foxes can refine their own attempts, aligning individual learning with broader patterns of successful behavior within the family group. As the kits' bodies grow stronger and more coordinated, their hunting attempts extend farther from the den. Short forays into surrounding territory allow them to encounter a wider range of prey types and environmental conditions. Each new context presents a slightly different challenge, requiring adjustments in posture, timing, and approach. The fox learns to read the subtle cues of each environment, from the way grass shifts under a light breeze to the faint sounds that indicate movement beneath the surface. These cues become part of the fox's decision-making process, guiding where to focus attention and when to commit to movement. The process of learning to hunt is gradual, unfolding over months rather than days. Each small success builds confidence, while each failure refines technique. The fox does not reach a point at which learning stops. Even adults continue to adjust strategies based on changing prey availability and environmental conditions. The foundation laid during early development, however, shapes how the fox approaches hunting throughout its life. The coordination between senses and movement, established near the den, becomes the basis for more complex hunting behaviors in adulthood. As young foxes spend more time hunting independently, the influence of the den recedes, replaced by a growing familiarity with the broader territory. The skills learned in close proximity to the den are carried outward into open fields, woodland edges, and the margins of human-altered landscapes. Each new hunting attempt builds on the last, weaving experience into a developing pattern of behavior that reflects both the fox's individual learning history and the opportunities offered by its environment. In moments when a hunt succeeds, the capture of prey reinforces the timing and approach that led to success. In moments when prey escapes, the fox adjusts, altering angle, speed, or timing in subsequent attempts. This feedback loop between action and outcome continues to shape hunting behavior across the fox's life, embedding learning within the physical experience of movement through the landscape. The fox becomes a hunter not through instruction, but through the accumulation of countless small adjustments made in response to the shifting patterns of prey and ground. As daylight fades and the landscape settles into longer stretches of shadow, sound begins to carry in different ways. Air cools and stills, allowing calls to travel farther across open ground. In these quieter conditions, the fox's voice becomes part of the nocturnal soundscape, threading through hedgerows, fields, and the edges of woodland. Fox vocalizations take many forms, ranging from short barks to drawn-out, high-pitched screams and softer chattering sounds. Each carries differently through the night air, shaped by distance, terrain, and the structure of the surrounding vegetation. Some calls are used only during particular periods of the year, especially during the mating season, when vocal communication plays a more prominent role in locating and signaling to potential partners. The high-pitched scream, often startling to human listeners, can carry over long distances at night, its tone cutting through the background hush of insects and wind. This call does not remain confined to the immediate area around the fox. It travels across open ground, rising above low vegetation and bending slightly around obstacles, allowing individuals separated by considerable distances to remain acoustically connected. The range of fox vocalizations allows communication without physical contact. A bark may signal presence at closer range, while longer calls reach across wider spaces. The variability of these sounds supports different functions, from signaling readiness to mate to maintaining awareness of other foxes within overlapping territories. In the darkness, where visual cues are limited, these sounds provide a way for foxes to map one another's positions in space without approaching directly. The night becomes a field of sound, with each call marking a point within the larger acoustic landscape. The structure of the environment shapes how these calls are heard. In open fields, sound spreads with fewer interruptions, carrying cleanly across grass and low vegetation. In woodland, trunks and undergrowth scatter and absorb sound, breaking calls into softer fragments that travel shorter distances. Along urban edges, walls and buildings reflect sound, creating echoes and pockets of amplified noise in narrow corridors. The fox's vocalizations adapt to these conditions, not by changing in conscious response to environment, but by being interpreted differently depending on the acoustic properties of the space through which they travel. There is a way in which these nighttime calls resemble the use of light in darkened spaces. A single light source can signal presence without revealing precise detail, allowing others to orient themselves without direct contact. A fox's call signals location and intent without requiring close approach. The sound carries information about the caller's presence and relative position, enabling others to adjust their movements accordingly. The foxes remain aware of one another's distribution across the landscape through sound, maintaining spacing and timing that reduces the likelihood of unexpected encounters. Vocal communication also intersects with the fox's broader strategy of avoiding unnecessary confrontation. By announcing presence through sound, foxes can maintain distance without the need for direct visual contact or physical interaction. A call may prompt another fox to alter its route or delay movement through a particular area, reducing the chance of crossing paths in confined spaces. In this way, sound acts as a buffer, creating a form of acoustic spacing that supports coexistence within overlapping territories. The quality of a call changes with distance, offering cues about how far away the caller might be. As sound travels, higher frequencies attenuate more quickly than lower ones, and the clarity of the call diminishes. A distant scream may arrive as a thin, stretched sound, while a nearby bark carries more detail and intensity. Foxes, attuned to these variations, can infer relative distance from the character of the sound they hear. This allows them to assess whether another fox is near enough to warrant adjustment of movement, or far enough away to be of little immediate consequence. The use of vocalizations does not replace other forms of communication, but it complements them within the nocturnal environment. In darkness, scent and sound become primary channels of information. Sound, in particular, provides immediate feedback about changes in the positions of other foxes. A call heard from one direction and then, later, from another, indicates movement across the landscape. The fox integrates this acoustic information into its ongoing map of territory use, adjusting routes and timing in response to the shifting pattern of calls. The night air itself influences how vocalizations are perceived. Cooler temperatures allow sound to travel more efficiently, and still air reduces the scattering of sound waves. Under these conditions, a fox's call may reach farther than it would during the warmer, more turbulent air of daytime. The fox's nocturnal activity patterns align with these acoustic properties, making vocal communication more effective during the hours when it is most needed. The night becomes a medium that carries sound with greater clarity, extending the reach of each call across a wider area. As the fox moves through the landscape, it remains aware not only of its own calls, but of the broader chorus of nocturnal sounds. The calls of other foxes blend with the rustle of leaves, the chirring of insects, and the distant sounds of human activity. Within this layered soundscape, the fox distinguishes familiar patterns, filtering relevant signals from background noise. This selective attention allows the fox to respond appropriately to calls that matter, while ignoring those that do not require immediate adjustment of behavior. Over time, the patterns of vocalization within a territory create an acoustic map of activity. Certain areas may be associated with more frequent calls during particular seasons, reflecting the presence of individuals engaged in mating or territorial signaling. Other areas remain quieter, used primarily for travel or foraging. The fox's movement through this acoustic landscape is shaped by these patterns, with routes chosen not only for physical cover, but also for the sound environment they offer. Quieter corridors may be preferred when the fox seeks to avoid drawing attention, while more open acoustic spaces may be tolerated when communication is advantageous. As the night deepens, calls rise and fall in frequency, responding to the shifting rhythms of activity across the landscape. The fox's voice becomes one thread within this nocturnal tapestry, marking presence, signaling intent, and shaping how individuals move in relation to one another. The sounds fade into the distance, leaving behind a quiet sense of distribution across space, as foxes continue their movements through darkness, guided as much by what they hear as by what they see. Along the narrow paths that thread between hedgerows and across open ground, the fox encounters information that does not travel by sound or sight, but by lingering trace. Scent settles into the landscape, absorbed by soil, caught in the fibers of grass, and held within the rough textures of stone and bark. The ground becomes a quiet record of recent presence, with each marked point carrying information about who passed through, when, and in what direction. For the fox, this layer of the environment is read through brief pauses and lowered muzzles, with the nose moving close to the surface to draw in the chemical traces left behind. Scent glands located near the tail and paws produce these marks. As the fox moves, small amounts of scent are deposited onto the ground and onto prominent features along its roots. These deposits are not random. Raised points, such as stones, tufts of grass, or the edges of pathways, tend to receive more frequent marking, as they hold scent longer and allow it to disperse more effectively into the surrounding air. Over time, these points become part of a network of scent markers that outline the fox's use of space, creating a map that can be read by others who pass through the same area. These scent marks convey identity. Each fox carries a chemical signature that distinguishes it from others, allowing individuals to recognize who has been present without direct encounter. The scent also communicates territorial boundaries, indicating areas of regular use and signaling to others where one individual's activity is concentrated. This information persists for long periods, with scent markers remaining detectable well after the fox that deposited them has moved on. The persistence of scent allows communication to occur asynchronously, with information passing between individuals who never meet in person. The presence of scent reduces the need for direct conflict. By reading scent marks, a fox can adjust its movement to avoid areas where another individual has been recently active, or to time its passage to reduce the likelihood of encounter. This allows multiple foxes to share overlapping territories with fewer direct confrontations, relying on chemical information to negotiate space rather than on physical displays. The landscape becomes layered with invisible boundaries, guiding movement in subtle ways that minimize unnecessary interaction. As the fox moves along a familiar route, it samples the scent marks left by others, building an understanding of who has been present and how recently. A fresh mark carries a stronger, more defined odor, while older marks fade and diffuse into the background of environmental smells. The fox interprets these differences in intensity as cues about timing, adjusting its behavior accordingly. A recent mark may prompt caution or a change in route, while an older trace may be treated as background information that no longer requires immediate response. There is a way in which this use of scent resembles how people read signs left in shared spaces. A recently placed marker, such as a fresh footprint in damp soil or a newly moved object, signals recent activity and suggests that someone is nearby. Older signs, softened by time and weather, indicate past presence without implying immediate proximity. The fox reads scent in this layered way, distinguishing between fresh and faded information to guide its decisions about movement and timing. The physical properties of the environment influence how scent persists. In dry conditions, scent may linger longer on surfaces that absorb and hold chemical compounds, such as rough stone or fibrous plant material. In wet conditions, rain can wash scent away from exposed surfaces, redistributing it across soil and leaf litter, or diluting it to the point of near disappearance. The fox adapts its marking behavior to these conditions, reinforcing marks more frequently in environments where scent fades quickly, and relying on more stable surfaces to carry information across longer periods. Scent marks are also used to communicate readiness for social interaction, particularly during the breeding season. Changes in the chemical composition of scent convey information about reproductive status, allowing foxes to locate potential partners without direct contact. These signals travel through the same network of marked points that outline territory use, layering additional meaning onto the existing chemical map of the landscape. The fox's nose becomes a primary tool for navigating this social dimension of space, detecting not only who has been present, but also the changing status of individuals within the population. The act of scent marking involves physical contact with the environment. The fox may pause briefly to place a mark, lifting its body slightly or pressing against a surface. These moments are woven into the fox's broader pattern of movement, occurring at points along routes that are already significant for navigation or for transition between areas. The fox does not need to stop for long. The deposit of scent is quick, and movement resumes almost immediately. Yet the cumulative effect of these small actions is the creation of a chemical landscape that persists beyond the moment of marking. As the fox reads this chemical landscape, it integrates scent information with what it hears and sees. A path that appears quiet may carry fresh scent, indicating recent passage by another fox. Conversely, a path that looks disturbed may hold little scent, suggesting that the physical traces are older and no longer reflect current activity. The fox weighs these different layers of information together, forming a more complete picture of how space is being used at a given moment. This integration supports flexible movement through shared ground, allowing the fox to avoid unnecessary encounters while still accessing productive areas. The persistence of scent also creates a form of continuity across time. Even when a fox is absent from an area, its chemical traces remain, influencing how others move through that space. In this way, scent extends the fox's presence beyond its physical body, shaping patterns of movement and interaction long after it has passed through. The landscape becomes a record not only of paths and dens, but of chemical signals that guide the behavior of individuals across overlapping territories. As the fox moves on, the scent it leaves behind fades gradually, its information slowly blending into the background of environmental smells. New marks are placed elsewhere, refreshing the chemical map of the territory. The cycle of marking and fading continues, creating a dynamic pattern of communication that evolves with movement, weather, and social change. Through this quiet exchange of chemical signals, foxes navigate shared spaces with reduced conflict, guided by an invisible layer of information written onto the ground itself. As the seasons shift and daylight patterns change, the social structure of the fox's life enters a more focused phase. During the breeding period, foxes form pair bonds that shape how space is used and how effort is shared. These bonds may last only for the duration of raising young, or they may extend across longer periods in some species. The bond is not expressed through constant proximity, but through coordinated use of territory and shared investment in the care of offspring. The landscape becomes a shared field of activity, with each adult contributing to the survival of the next generation. Within these pair bonds, both parents often participate in raising young. The early weeks after birth are spent largely within the shelter of the den, where the mother remains with the kits to provide warmth and protection. During this time, the father often takes on the role of provisioning, bringing food back to the den entrance and depositing it where the mother can access it without leaving the young unattended. This division of roles reflects the different demands of the period. The kits require constant presence and warmth, while the need for food requires movement through the territory. By sharing these responsibilities, the pair increases the likelihood that the young will survive the vulnerable early stages of development. In some species and contexts, additional adults may assist in provisioning kits. These helpers, often related individuals, contribute food and presence, increasing the flow of resources to the den. The presence of multiple caregivers reduces the burden on any one adult and provides redundancy in case one individual is temporarily unable to hunt effectively. The den becomes a focal point for cooperative effort, with food arriving through different routes and at different times, smoothing out the variability of hunting success across individuals. The process of raising young is embedded within the physical rhythms of the landscape. The adults' movements trace routes between hunting grounds and the den, their paths becoming familiar through repeated use. Each return to the den is marked by a brief transition from open movement to careful approach, as adults slow and adjust posture near the entrance to avoid drawing attention to the location of the young. The den mouth becomes a threshold where external movement is transformed into internal stillness, supporting the protected environment within. The care of kits involves not only the provision of food, but also the gradual introduction of the young to the textures and sounds of the surrounding world. As kits grow, adults allow them to spend more time near the den entrance, observing the movements of the landscape beyond. The presence of adults nearby provides a sense of security that supports exploration. The kit's early ventures into the outer environment occur within the protective radius of the parent's attention, creating a buffer against sudden disturbance. The pair bond functions like a shared task that unfolds across time and space. Two individuals coordinate their efforts toward a common outcome, adjusting roles as conditions change. When one adult is engaged in hunting, the other remains closer to the den. When resources are plentiful, both may contribute to provisioning, allowing more frequent feeding of the young. This coordination does not require constant communication. It emerges through repeated patterns of movement and return, with each adult responding to the presence and actions of the other. As the kits grow and begin to move more confidently, the demands on the parents shift. The mother may begin to spend more time outside the den, participating more actively in hunting. The father's role may adjust accordingly, with periods of increased presence near the den when the young remain vulnerable. the pair bond remains flexible, adapting to the changing needs of the young and the changing availability of resources within the territory. This flexibility allows the family group to respond to variation in food abundance, weather conditions, and disturbance from other animals or human activity. The raising of young also involves the gradual transmission of behavioral patterns. Through observation, kits learn the rhythms of movement that define adult life. They see how adults pause at certain points along routes, how they adjust posture near cover, and how they approach the den with care. These observations form part of the learning process that will later support independent movement and hunting. The pair bond thus supports not only the physical survival of the young, but also the transfer of patterns of behavior that align with the specific conditions of the local environment. The landscape itself shapes the nature of pair bonding and care. In areas where food is abundant and routes are short, the demands on each adult may be lower, allowing more overlap in roles and more frequent returns to the den. In more resource-scarce environments, longer foraging trips may be required, increasing the importance of coordination and timing between adults. The pair bond adjusts to these conditions, with patterns of movement and care reflecting the constraints and opportunities offered by the surrounding terrain. The presence of helpers can further alter these dynamics. When additional adults contribute to provisioning, the primary pair may be able to spend more time resting or attending to the young directly. The flow of food becomes less dependent on the success of any one individual, increasing the resilience of the family group to short-term fluctuations in hunting success. The den becomes a shared point of convergence for multiple paths through the landscape, each path bringing resources back to a central place of care. As the breeding season passes and the kits grow toward independence, the pair bond may loosen. The intense coordination required during the early stages of raising young gives way to more independent patterns of movement. The adults may spend less time near one another and more time moving separately through their territory. In species where pair bonds are seasonal, the connection may dissolve as the immediate need for cooperation diminishes. In species where longer-term partnerships occur, the bond may persist beyond the period of direct care, shaping future patterns of territory use and social interaction. Throughout this process, the raising of young remains grounded in the physical realities of movement through space, the transport of food across distance, and the maintenance of a sheltered environment within the den. The pair bond is expressed not through constant proximity, but through the alignment of routes, timing, and effort across the landscape. Each adult contributes to the continuity of care through repeated, coordinated movement, weaving the survival of the young into the broader patterns of travel and foraging that define fox life. As the young fox grows in size and confidence, the den that once defined the boundaries of its world begins to recede in importance. The familiar routes around the entrance, the sheltered spaces beneath roots and stones, and the small training grounds of early play no longer contain the full range of movement the body is capable of. A subtle restlessness appears in the fox's behavior. Paths that once felt sufficient are crossed more quickly. Pauses near the den become shorter. The pull of the wider landscape grows stronger as the fox approaches the stage of life when it will begin to move beyond the territory in which it was born. Dispersal marks a significant transition in the fox's life. young foxes leave the area of their birth to establish new territories elsewhere. This movement reduces competition for resources within the natal territory and opens space for younger siblings or future litters. The act of leaving is not a single step beyond a boundary. It unfolds as a gradual extension of range, with the young fox exploring farther from familiar routes before committing to longer movements that carry it into unfamiliar ground. Each outward movement tests the fox's ability to navigate without the reference points that once anchored its daily activity. The landscape encountered during dispersal presents new risks. Juvenile foxes experience higher mortality in the wild than established adults, and survival depends heavily on the stability of the habitats they move through. Areas with reliable cover, consistent prey availability, and limited disturbance offer greater chances of success. In contrast, fragmented habitats and heavily altered landscapes increase exposure to threats, from predators to human-related hazards. The young fox's movement through these spaces reflects a balance between exploration and caution, with routes chosen based on the availability of cover and the presence of familiar textures that offer some continuity with the birth ground. As the fox moves into new areas, the patterns of prey abundance it encounters shape where it pauses and where it continues onward. Fox populations fluctuate with prey availability, and areas that appear promising at one moment may offer little sustenance at another. Disease outbreaks can reduce local populations quickly, altering the competitive landscape and changing the suitability of particular territories. The dispersing fox moves within this shifting field of opportunity and risk, responding to cues of prey presence and to the density of other foxes already established in an area. Leaving the birth ground resembles the process of moving into an unfamiliar neighborhood. Familiar routes and landmarks are replaced by new ones that must be learned through experience. Initial movements are cautious, with frequent pauses to orient and reassess. Over time, as new reference points are established, movement becomes more fluid. The fox builds a new internal map of space, integrating the textures, sounds, and patterns of the unfamiliar landscape into its ongoing navigation. This mapping process allows the fox to move with increasing confidence as the new territory becomes familiar. Urban environments present particular challenges and opportunities during dispersal. While cities can reduce predation pressure from larger wild predators, they introduce new risks, especially from vehicles. Young foxes must learn to interpret the rhythms of traffic, adjusting crossing behavior in response to patterns of movement along roads. Some individuals learn to use underpasses or quieter routes to navigate around high-traffic areas, reducing the likelihood of collision. These learned routes become part of the fox's spatial memory, shaping how it moves through human-altered landscapes as it establishes a new territory. The process of dispersal also influences the structure of fox populations across a region. As young foxes move outward and establish territories, they contribute to the spread of individuals across suitable habitats, supporting genetic exchange between populations. This movement can help maintain healthier population structures, reducing the risks associated with inbreeding within isolated groups. The dispersal of individuals thus connects local populations into a broader network, with movement across landscapes serving both individual survival and population-level resilience. The risks associated with dispersal are not evenly distributed across all individuals. Some young foxes may encounter favorable conditions early, finding territories with abundant prey and limited competition. Others may traverse multiple unsuitable areas before finding a place to settle, increasing exposure to threats and energetic costs. The variability of these outcomes reflects the complex interplay between individual behavior, landscape structure, and broader ecological conditions. The fox's movement through this phase is shaped by both internal readiness and external circumstance, with success depending on the alignment of these factors. As the young fox continues to move through unfamiliar ground, its behavior reflects the accumulation of new experience. Routes that initially felt uncertain become part of a growing network of familiar paths. The fox learns where cover is reliable, where prey tends to be present, and where risks are concentrated. This learning process gradually transforms unfamiliar space into a new home range, anchored by new reference points that replace those of the birth ground. The transition from natal territory to independent range is marked not by a single boundary crossed, but by the gradual replacement of one internal map with another. The leaving of the birth ground does not erase the influence of early learning. The movement patterns, sensory strategies, and spatial awareness developed during early life continue to shape how the fox navigates new territories. The skills honed near the den, refined through early hunting attempts and play, carry forward into the dispersal phase, supporting adaptation to new conditions. In this way, the fox's early environment leaves an imprint on later movement, guiding how the body reads and responds to unfamiliar ground. As dispersal continues and a new territory begins to take shape, the fox's movement slows from exploratory ranging to more settled patterns of use. Routes become repeated. Particular areas are revisited as prey availability and cover are assessed over time. The landscape that once felt open and undefined gradually resolves into a set of familiar paths and places, forming the foundation of an independent home range. The fox's journey away from the birth ground thus resolves into the establishment of a new pattern of movement, linking the past environment of early development with the future terrain of adult life. As foxes move through territories shaped by people, the textures of the ground change in ways that alter how movement, sound, and cover are experienced. Soft soil gives way to pavement. Leaf litter is replaced by compacted gravel. Hedges become fences, and open fields break into smaller parcels defined by walls, roads, and buildings. Within these altered landscapes, foxes adapt their movement patterns to navigate narrow corridors, sudden openings, and surfaces that transmit sound differently from natural ground. Urban and suburban environments compress space. Routes that once followed continuous cover now thread between fences and along the edges of buildings. Foxes learn to move through these constrained pathways with the same careful adjustments used in dense vegetation, lowering posture near walls and using shadowed margins to reduce visibility. The rhythm of movement changes as well. In human landscapes, periods of activity are often shaped by predictable pulses of disturbance, such as traffic flows and human routines. Foxes learn to time their movements to quieter intervals, emerging more frequently during late-night hours when surface activity diminishes. The presence of artificial light alters the fox's relationship with darkness. Streetlights create pools of illumination that break the night into alternating zones of brightness and shadow. Foxes move along the edges of these lighted areas, using the contrast between light and dark to remain less visible while still navigating effectively. The shifting patterns of shadow cast by buildings and parked vehicles provide cover that changes with time of night and with weather conditions, requiring continuous adjustment of routes. The fox reads these patterns as part of the landscape, integrating light and shadow into its movement strategy. Human-altered environments also reshape the distribution of food. Refuse, compost, and small animals attracted to gardens and waste provide new foraging opportunities. These resources are often concentrated in specific locations, creating focal points of activity. Foxes incorporate these points into their movement patterns, visiting them when disturbance is low and retreating along familiar routes afterward. The reliability of these food sources varies with human behavior, and foxes learn to anticipate changes in availability based on routines of waste disposal and garden maintenance. Movement through built environments requires attention to new forms of risk. Roads introduce fast-moving hazards that differ from natural threats. Foxes learn to interpret the patterns of traffic, adjusting crossing behavior based on sound and vibration. Some individuals develop routes that use underpasses, culverts, or quieter side streets to avoid busy roads. These learned pathways become part of the fox's spatial memory, shaping how it moves between feeding sites and resting places within fragmented urban terrain. There is a way in which navigating human landscapes resembles moving through a maze of narrow passages and open courtyards, where each turn presents a different pattern of sound, light, and surface. The fox does not rely on a single route. Instead, it develops multiple pathways that connect key points within its territory, allowing flexibility when certain corridors become temporarily inaccessible due to human activity. Over time, this network of routes supports efficient movement through spaces that would otherwise be disorienting. Urban territories can support higher densities of foxes than rural landscapes due to the concentration of food resources. This increased density intensifies the need for temporal partitioning of space. Foxes may use the same corridors and feeding sites at different times, adjusting activity patterns to avoid direct encounters. The shared use of narrow urban pathways amplifies the importance of timing and awareness of other individuals' movements, with scent and sound providing cues about recent activity. The physical structure of human landscapes influences how foxes rest and shelter. Dens may be located beneath sheds, in overgrown corners of gardens, or within disused spaces along infrastructure. These sites offer concealment and relative stability, but they are also subject to sudden disturbance. The fox adapts by selecting shelter sites that offer multiple exit routes and by maintaining alternative resting locations within its territory. This redundancy reduces the risk associated with relying on any single shelter in environments where human activity can change quickly. The presence of people shapes fox behavior not through constant interaction, but through the predictable patterns of human movement. Foxes learn when streets are most active, when gardens are likely to be quiet, and when bins are put out for collection. These rhythms become part of the fox's internal map of the territory, guiding movement through time as well as space. The fox's activity patterns in human landscapes are thus structured around a timetable that reflects human routines, even though direct encounters are often avoided. As foxes adapt to these environments, their movements continue to reflect the same underlying principles seen in more natural settings. They seek cover, adjust posture near obstacles, and move along edges that offer concealment. The materials of the landscape change, but the strategies remain consistent. The fox reads the ground through texture and sound, reads the air through scent and movement, and fits its body into the available spaces with the same measured attention that guides movement through woodland and field. Over time, the human landscape becomes another form of habitat, layered with roots, shelters, and feeding sites that the fox integrates into its daily movement. The fox does not become a creature of buildings and pavement alone. Instead, it weaves these elements into its existing pattern of interaction with space, using human-made structures as additional contours within the broader terrain of its life. The result is a pattern of movement that reflects both continuity and adaptation, with the fox's body reading and responding to an environment reshaped by human presence, while maintaining the same quiet, responsive engagement with the ground beneath its paws. As winter settles across the landscape, the textures that guide the fox's movement change in subtle but persistent ways. Soil hardens with frost. Snow compresses underfoot into a thin crust that responds differently to weight and temperature. Vegetation that once bent softly now resists movement, its stems brittle in the cold. These changes alter how sound travels and how surfaces yield, shaping the fox's interaction with ground and air as it moves through a season of reduced abundance. Food becomes harder to find as prey activity declines in colder conditions. Small mammals spend more time beneath the surface, and insects disappear almost entirely from the surface world. The fox responds by adjusting movement patterns, extending foraging time, and widening the area of nightly travel. Each step across frozen ground carries more consequence. Noise travels farther, and the risk of slipping increases where ice forms beneath thin layers of snow. The fox adapts by shortening stride and distributing weight more carefully, preserving quiet movement even when surfaces resist. Energy conservation becomes a central concern. The fox cannot afford to expend energy without reasonable expectation of return. Movement slows in periods of low prey activity, with longer pauses between bursts of foraging. The den becomes more central to daily rhythms, offering insulation from cold and a place to rest between foraging efforts. The buffered temperature within the ground supports longer periods of stillness, allowing the fox to recover heat lost during excursions into colder air. Caching behavior becomes more significant during winter. Food stored during periods of relative abundance provides a buffer against scarcity. The fox returns to remembered cache sites, checking beneath snow and frozen soil for hidden stores. Some caches will have been lost to spoilage or discovered by other animals, but others remain intact, offering small but valuable supplements to the fox's winter diet. These returns to hidden stores reduce the need for constant hunting when prey is difficult to locate, smoothing out the energetic costs of winter movement. The distribution of prey shifts with the season, concentrating activity in microhabitats that offer shelter and warmth. The fox learns to focus attention on these areas, such as beneath dense vegetation, along the edges of snowbanks, where meltwater creates narrow channels of exposed ground, and near structures that trap heat. These pockets of activity become focal points within the winter landscape, guiding the fox's routes as it seeks to maximize the likelihood of encountering prey while minimizing unnecessary travel. Moving through winter landscapes resembles navigating a room where furniture has been rearranged. Familiar routes are obstructed by snowdrifts or icy patches, requiring the fox to adjust its habitual paths. The ground that once offered predictable footing now presents variable resistance, and the fox must recalibrate its movement in response. Over time, new winter routes emerge, shaped by the distribution of snow, ice, and sheltered ground. The fox's internal map of territory shifts to accommodate these seasonal changes, overlaying winter-specific pathways onto the broader network of familiar routes. The cold also affects how scent and sound persist in the environment. Frozen ground holds scent differently from moist soil, sometimes preserving chemical traces longer, but making them more brittle and susceptible to sudden loss when surfaces are disturbed. Sound carries differently across cold air, often traveling farther in still winter nights. The fox integrates these changes into its sensory reading of the landscape, adjusting expectations about how far calls may carry and how long scent marks may remain detectable. These sensory shifts influence how the fox navigates shared ground during a season when individuals may be more widely dispersed in search of scarce resources. The physical demands of winter movement place additional strain on the fox's body. Cold temperatures increase the energetic cost of maintaining body heat, and reduced prey availability means that each successful hunt carries greater importance. The fox's fur provides insulation, trapping a layer of air close to the skin that slows heat loss. The body adopts postures that reduce exposure during rest, curling to minimize surface area in contact with cold air. These small adjustments contribute to energy conservation across long periods of low resource availability. As winter progresses, the fox's activity patterns may become more closely tied to brief windows of favorable conditions, periods of milder temperature or snowfall that softens crusted surfaces, create opportunities for quieter movement and more effective hunting. The fox learns to take advantage of these moments, increasing activity when conditions temporarily improve. Conversely, during extended cold snaps or heavy ice formation, the fox may reduce movement further, relying more heavily on stored energy and cached food. This dynamic adjustment reflects a continuous balancing of risk and reward within a constrained energetic budget. The presence of human-altered environments can alter the severity of winter scarcity. Urban heat islands may create pockets of milder conditions where snow melts more quickly and prey remains more accessible. Discarded food and concentrated resources around human structures can provide supplemental nutrition during periods when natural prey is scarce. The fox integrates these opportunities into its winter movement patterns, adjusting routes to include areas where conditions are slightly less harsh. This flexibility supports survival in fragmented landscapes where natural winter refuges may be limited. Despite these adaptations, winter remains a period of heightened vulnerability. The combination of reduced prey, increased energetic costs, and more challenging movement conditions creates a narrow margin for error. Each movement must be weighed against the potential return, and each successful foraging attempt carries disproportionate importance. The fox's winter life becomes a careful negotiation with scarcity, guided by memory of stored resources, sensitivity to microhabitats, and an ongoing adjustment to the shifting textures of frozen ground and cold air. As the season deepens, the fox's movement through the winter landscape traces a quieter, more deliberate pattern. Routes narrow toward sheltered areas. Pauses lengthen between bursts of activity. The ground holds the marks of careful steps pressed into snow and frost, fading slowly under wind and fresh snowfall. Through these restrained movements, the fox continues to thread its way through a season defined by scarcity, maintaining presence within a landscape that offers fewer opportunities and demands greater precision with each step. As the fox moves through fields, woodlands, and the margins between them, its presence subtly reshapes the patterns of life around it. Each movement, each hunt, and each path taken through grass and leaf litter contributes to a web of interactions that extends beyond the fox itself. The fox is not an isolated figure moving through a static environment. It is one thread within a living network, influencing and being influenced by the distribution and behavior of other organisms across the landscape. Predation by foxes shapes the populations of small mammals, birds, and invertebrates. By removing individuals from these populations, the fox alters the pressure placed on plant communities. When rodent numbers are moderated, grazing and seed consumption patterns shift, affecting how vegetation regenerates and spreads. These changes ripple outward, influencing the availability of cover and food for other species. The fox's hunting activity thus contributes to the structure of the landscape at a scale that extends beyond the immediate act of predation, linking individual movements to broader ecological patterns. The fox also participates in the redistribution of nutrients. Through the consumption of prey and the deposition of waste, nutrients move from one part of the landscape to another. Remains of prey may be carried away from capture sites and consumed elsewhere, transferring organic material across small distances. These movements influence the local distribution of nutrients in soil and vegetation, contributing to the patchwork of fertility that shapes plant growth across the territory. The fox's movement thus becomes a vector for nutrient flow, connecting different parts of the ecosystem through repeated foraging and resting. Carcasses left by foxes, whether from partially consumed prey or scavenged remains, provide food for other animals. Invertebrates, birds, and smaller scavengers make use of these remains, integrating the fox's hunting into a broader network of consumption. Even the traces of fox activity, such as disturbed soil around dens or caches, create microhabitats that influence the distribution of insects and microorganisms. These small-scale disturbances contribute to the landscape's diversity of conditions, supporting a range of species adapted to different microenvironments. There is a way in which the fox's role within the ecosystem resembles that of a moving hinge within a network of interactions. Each action shifts pressure and opportunity across connected parts of the system. A change in prey abundance affects plant growth. Changes in plant cover alter the availability of shelter for other animals. The fox's movement through these interconnected relationships does not follow a single linear path of cause and effect, but unfolds as a series of overlapping influences that shape the texture of the environment over time. The fox also competes with other predators for shared resources. In some landscapes, foxes coexist with larger carnivores or with other mesopredators, each species drawing from overlapping prey populations. The presence or absence of foxes can influence how these other predators use space. In areas where fox populations are reduced, smaller prey species may experience changes in predation pressure, potentially altering the balance of interactions within the community. Conversely, where foxes are abundant, their hunting activity can shape the foraging strategies and movement patterns of other predators through competition and avoidance. Human influence further complicates these ecological relationships. Changes in land use, such as agriculture, urban development, and habitat fragmentation, alter the availability of prey and cover for foxes. These changes ripple outward through the ecosystem, reshaping the relationships between species. In some contexts, foxes may thrive in human-altered landscapes, increasing their influence on local prey populations. In others, habitat loss may constrain fox movement and reduce their ecological role. The fox's position within the ecosystem is therefore dynamic, shifting in response to broader changes in landscape structure and resource distribution. The presence of foxes can also influence the behavior of prey species. Small mammals and birds may alter their movement patterns, foraging times, or use of cover in response to predation risk. These behavioral changes can have cascading effects on plant communities, as altered foraging behavior affects where and how plants are grazed or seeds are dispersed. The fox thus shapes the ecosystem not only through direct predation, but also through the indirect effects of fear and avoidance that ripple through prey populations. The fox's dens and pathways contribute to the ecosystem's physical structure. Dens create small disturbances in soil that can be colonized by plants adapted to disturbed ground. Paths worn by repeated movement influence how water flows across the surface, subtly altering patterns of erosion and deposition. Over long periods, these small physical changes accumulate, shaping microtopography within the landscape. The fox's body becomes an agent of physical change, not through large-scale transformation, but through repeated small-scale interactions with soil and vegetation. The integration of foxes into ecosystem processes reflects the interconnectedness of movement, feeding, and habitat use. The fox does not act upon the ecosystem from outside it. Its survival depends on the same flows of energy and matter that it influences. Each successful hunt draws energy from prey populations. Each movement across the ground contributes to the redistribution of that energy through waste and disturbance. The fox is embedded within the circulation of nutrients and organisms that define the living landscape. As the fox moves through its territory, the ecosystem responds in small, continuous ways. Plant growth patterns shift in response to changes in grazing pressure. Invertebrate communities respond to the availability of carrion and disturbed soil. Other predators adjust their foraging strategies in response to the presence of a competitor. These responses accumulate over time, shaping the community's composition and structure. The fox's role within the ecosystem is therefore both immediate and long-term, linking individual behavior to patterns that unfold across seasons and generations. The fox's movement through the landscape can be seen as part of a broader circulation of life within the ecosystem. Energy moves from plants to herbivores, from herbivores to predators, and back into the soil through waste and decomposition. The fox participates in this circulation, not as a controlling force, but as one element within a network of exchanges that sustain the functioning of the landscape. The ground beneath the fox's paws carries the traces of these exchanges, layered with the movements and interactions of countless organisms whose lives intersect in time and space. As the fox moves through its territory, the landscape presents not only opportunities for food and shelter, but also a shifting field of threats. Some dangers arise from other animals, others emerge from the structure and activity of human environments. Many pressures are subtle, operating through changes in habitat, disease, and resource availability, rather than through direct confrontation. The fox's survival depends on its ability to read these pressures and to adjust movement, timing, and behavior in response to them. Predation pressure varies with region and habitat. In some landscapes, larger carnivores present a direct threat, shaping how foxes use cover and when they move. The presence of these predators can compress fox activity into narrower windows of time and space, as foxes avoid high-risk areas or shift their movements to periods when larger predators are less active. This temporal and spatial adjustment reduces the likelihood of encounter, but it also constrains access to certain resources, forcing foxes to balance safety against foraging opportunity. Disease represents a less visible but significant pressure. Pathogens such as rabies or mange can spread through populations, reducing survival and altering behavior. Infected individuals may experience changes in movement patterns, reduced mobility, or altered social interactions, affecting not only their own survival prospects, but also the structure of local populations. Disease outbreaks can cause rapid declines in fox numbers, reshaping the competitive landscape and influencing how remaining individuals use space. The fox's ability to persist through such periods depends partly on the distribution of individuals across the landscape and the availability of refuges where contact rates are lower. Habitat fragmentation imposes another layer of pressure. As continuous landscapes are broken into smaller patches by roads, development, and agricultural boundaries, the fox's movement becomes constrained. Crossing between patches often involves navigating exposed or hazardous areas, increasing the risk of mortality. Fragmentation also reduces the size of continuous territories, intensifying competition for resources within remaining suitable habitat. The fox adapts by developing routes through fragmented terrain, using corridors of cover where available. But each crossing carries increased risk compared to movement within intact habitats. Roads introduce a distinct form of threat that combines speed, noise, and unpredictability. Vehicles move faster than any natural predator, and their approach may be difficult to judge accurately, especially under low light conditions. Foxes learn to associate the sound and vibration of traffic with danger, adjusting crossing behavior to quieter intervals and using underpasses or culverts when available. Despite these adaptations, road mortality remains a significant pressure in many regions, particularly for dispersing juveniles whose routes are not yet well established. The risk of road encounters shapes patterns of movement, with foxes favoring routes that minimize the need to cross high-traffic areas. Human persecution and conflict also influence survival pressures. In some regions, foxes are subject to control measures, whether through hunting, trapping, or culling. These pressures can reduce local populations and alter the age and sex structure of surviving individuals. The removal of individuals from a territory creates vacancies that may be filled by dispersing foxes, maintaining population presence but increasing turnover. This dynamic can lead to a constant state of flux within territories, with individuals adjusting to the absence of neighbors and the arrival of new competitors. There is a way in which navigating these varied threats resembles moving through a landscape where hazards appear and fade without clear boundaries. A route that is safe at one time may become dangerous at another, depending on human activity, seasonal changes, or the movements of other predators. The fox learns to read these shifting patterns, adjusting routes and timing to reduce exposure. Over time, certain paths become associated with higher risk and are avoided when possible, while others are favored for their relative safety. This learning process builds an internal map of risk layered over the physical map of territory. Resource scarcity compounds these threats. When prey availability declines, foxes may be forced to range farther or to take greater risks in order to secure enough food. This increased movement exposes them to more hazards, from predators to roads and human disturbance. The pressure to meet energetic needs can therefore push foxes into riskier behaviors, creating a feedback loop in which scarcity increases vulnerability. The fox's ability to manage this balance between risk and reward is central to survival, requiring continual assessment of when to persist in a given area and when to move on. Competition with other foxes and with other predators adds further complexity. Overlapping territories can lead to increased encounters, particularly when resources are limited. These interactions may result in displacement from preferred areas, pushing individuals into less optimal habitats with higher exposure to threats. The social dimension of survival pressure thus intersects with ecological and human-induced pressures, creating a multi-layered field of challenges that the fox must navigate. Environmental changes, such as extreme weather events, can intensify existing pressures. Severe winters, prolonged droughts, or sudden floods can reduce prey availability and alter the structure of cover, leaving foxes more exposed. These events can also damage dens and disrupt established routes, forcing foxes to reconfigure movement patterns quickly. The ability to adapt to rapid environmental change becomes a critical factor in survival, with individuals that can adjust routes and strategies more effectively gaining an advantage in unstable conditions. Despite these pressures, fox populations persist across a wide range of environments, reflecting the species' adaptability. This persistence does not indicate an absence of threat, but rather an ongoing process of adjustment in which survival depends on continual recalibration of behavior. Each fox carries forward a set of strategies shaped by local conditions, balancing the need to find food and shelter against the need to avoid danger. The landscape becomes a field of probabilities rather than certainties, with each movement representing a choice made within the constraints of risk. As the fox moves through this field of threats, its path is shaped by the accumulation of experience. Routes that once led to close encounters or near misses may be avoided in the future. Areas associated with repeated disturbance may be bypassed in favor of quieter corridors. This learning does not eliminate risk, but it refines how the fox navigates a landscape in which danger is unevenly distributed. Through this continual adjustment, the fox threads its way through survival pressures that shift with season, environment, and human presence, maintaining movement within a world that offers no fixed guarantees of safety. As the landscape settles into the long arc of evening, the fox's movement slows into a quieter rhythm, The urgency of foraging gives way to a more measured passage through familiar ground. Paths that were crossed with alert precision earlier now receive lighter attention, the body easing into routes that no longer demand the same intensity of focus. The fox moves through the dim edges of the night, as though following a current already traced into the land by repeated use, its body settling into patterns that have been shaped over time. The ground at this hour carries the faint impressions of earlier movement. Paw marks pressed into soft soil earlier in the night have begun to lose definition as moisture and settling smooth their edges. The air holds fewer disturbances. Insects quieten, and the background noise of the landscape thins into a low, steady hush. The fox's steps become less frequent, with longer pauses between movements as the body shifts toward rest. These pauses are not stillness alone. They are moments of quiet awareness, with the fox remaining attuned to the immediate space even as activity slows. Edges become important at this time. The fox moves along the boundaries between open ground and cover, where the transition from light to shadow offers both visibility and concealment. The margins of hedgerows, the lines of low walls, and the soft contours of ditch edges create pathways that hold familiar textures beneath the paws. These edges provide a sense of continuity as the night deepens, guiding movement along routes that feel secure even as the broader landscape fades into darkness. As activity diminishes, the fox's use of space narrows toward sheltered areas. The den or a familiar resting place becomes a point of gentle orientation rather than an immediate destination. The fox may pause near cover, choosing a spot where the ground offers insulation from the cooling air and where surrounding vegetation dampens sound. The body lowers into a resting posture, fur settling against the ground, tail curling slightly to conserve warmth. The contact between body and surface becomes more sustained, marking a transition from movement into rest. There is a quality to these moments that resembles the way a well-worn path feels underfoot at the end of a long walk. The terrain that once demanded attention now supports the body without effort, allowing movement to become simpler and more fluid. The fox's relationship with its territory at this hour reflects familiarity built through countless small journeys. Each route and resting place holds the memory of previous use, creating a sense of continuity that persists even as the day's activity fades. The fox's presence at the edge of night is quiet, but not absent. Even in rest, the body remains lightly attuned to the environment. Small sounds are registered. Shifts in air movement are felt against fur. The fox remains within the landscape's ongoing rhythm, resting within it rather than withdrawing from it entirely. The boundaries between activity and stillness soften, with rest becoming another form of engagement with space rather than a complete disengagement from it. As the hours move toward deeper night, the fox's movement becomes minimal. The landscape holds the fox within its folds, sheltering the body in small pockets of cover that offer warmth and quiet. The fox's day has been shaped by movement through changing textures of ground and air. Now those same textures hold the body in place, supporting a gradual settling into stillness. The fox remains a quiet presence within the larger field of the landscape. Paths remain traced beneath soil and leaf litter. Dens hold warmth beneath the ground. Scent lingers along familiar routes. These traces persist even when the fox itself is still, embedding its presence into the fabric of the territory. the edge of night becomes not an ending, but a continuation of the fox's place within a landscape that holds movement and rest in the same broad pattern of life. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you enjoyed learning about foxes